there. I see us. Okay, guys, welcome to Talks with E platform. I am your host, Dr. E, and I will be moderating this awesome, relevant conversation, joining other people all across the nation in solidarity and uniting together to have this conversation on the impact and experience of race. Before we get started, why don't you subscribe, right? Hit that subscribe button on the top right corner. Make sure you like this page so that way any updates that come up after tonight, you are connected with. And we invite you to plug in, because baby, we are about to have an awesome conversation. I have an awesome group of panelists that I will introduce shortly. So make sure you subscribe on Talks with E on Facebook, Instagram, and Twitter, where these conversations will be continuing. And also drop a comment. Let me know where you're tuning in from. Say hello to somebody else there. And if there's a comment or a quote that somebody just says in a way that Nelson Mandela would say it, type it in there, share it on your social media page, and be sure to tag Talks with E. Now, we are participating in this much needed conversation on the experiences and impact of race in society. Who we are today is shaped by the many places we have been, the people we have met, and the connections we have made in these streets called life. Today, we have a diverse panel that is representative of society at large, that is diverse and beautiful. And we get the opportunity to listen and converse with them and walk in the shoes of these panelists. Atticus Finch says, to best understand somebody, you have to walk in their skin, to walk in their shoes for a little bit. Don't worry, we are not going to be walking physically in the skins of our panelists, but when we get to walk with them in conversations, we get to build an understanding. And these stories build a bridge that helps us to connect. So I invite you to plug in. I invite you to invite somebody to this table. Share this link with your church group. Share this link with your book club group, your friends, your gym buddies, whoever you hang out with, because we need everybody at the table, and we invite you to plug in. Before we get started, I want to acknowledge that at times conversations can be difficult. They can be uncomfortable, but in debriefing with our panel, who some of them have met each other for the first time, in just that 20-minute interaction, we were already on a first name basis. Strangers from all walks of life, we are now building and making connections that are relevant and matter. So today, as we converse, let us purpose to maintain that welcoming conversation, a conversation where we actively put in effort to continue it and not inhibit or make somebody feel not wanted or not part of the table. In your chats, when you contribute to the discussion through your chat, when you share this conversation, be cognizant that you will be connecting with people that have lived in homes that you have not lived in. So they have differences in opinion and differences in backgrounds. Here in this space, we want to respect and acknowledge that truth for that individual. And we value that reality for that individual. So let us respect one another. Let us connect with each other. And most importantly, let us have a conversation that starts with, hello, it's me. I was wondering if you want to talk to me about this conversation. So let me introduce these panelists. I will go through their bios and then get them to answer one question for us. So we have Anoy. Anoy, if you can just wave, okay? He is a Chief Risk and Compliance Officer at WirePay, which is a new fintech startup company located in Virginia. Anoy is a first-generation Laotian refugee who migrated to the US in the early 90s at the end of the Vietnam and Laos Civil War in pursuit of the American dream. He grew up in a small town in Stockholm, California, in a disadvantaged minority community with limited access to resources. His first-hand experience in income inequality, poor access to education, quality education, and healthcare has driven him to get involved in community-based initiatives to help improve poverty. Again, Anoy, why don't you just give a queenly wave so people know who we're talking about? Thank you. And then our second panelist is Dr. David Washera. David, if you can very robustly, suavely wave at the congregation. Yes, there he is. He is a fintech entrepreneur, public finance and governance specialist, co-founder and managing director of this fintech startup, WirePay. He's also a public sector specialist at the World Bank, where he has served as the co-secretary for the World Bank Group Youth to Youth, and in 2014 established the Washera Endowment for Public Service, which provides scholarship and grants to university graduate students. He's also the co-founder of Youth Engagement Society, aimed at empowering the next generation and connecting them with networks and role models that they can emulate. He has taught public policy. He has served as a teaching fellow in public finance, bureaucracy, and public administration, both at SMU, Wiley College, and UNT North Texas. David, again, give that suave wave. Thank you. And lastly, but certainly not least, my good friend, Dr. Tony Roselli. His main research area focuses on the, Tony, wave, Tony, I'm sorry. Wave, thank you. Focuses on the experiences of racial minorities and women in golf. So if you're a golf player, this is your guy right here. He has published research on experiences of Black males and females in golf and a conceptual framework on the experiences of marginalized groups in golf, perceptions of golf, and various racial groups as golfers. His dissertation examined a case study of grassroots golf programs for Black females. His lived experience as a biracial Italian and Hispanic male who looks white has led to many behind the scenes looks into the mindset of members of society in a variety of spaces. It has been an interesting journey for him, he says. His wife is a school teacher and they have two wonderful children, ages 4.4 and a half, and 6. Tony, again, wave at me. And these are our panelists. And thank you so much for saying yes to joining this table, for giving of your time to that. And so we will dive right in with the first question. And Anoy, I will get you started. When were you first aware of your race?
Oh, yeah, absolutely. Well, first and foremost, I wanted to thank you, Elizabeth, for having me here and really talk about this important moment in our history. Obviously, if you don't speak now, the question has always been, when will you? And I've been honored, and thank you so much for, again, being invited into this panel. But just back to your question, in terms of when races, when was the first time that I was aware of races? Since I remember, really, when we first, was a refugee coming into the United States, and when we settled here in, Stockton, California, racism has always been a fabric of the life that, in a social fabric, it became normalized, right? But the really vivid ones that I remember as a child is when I started first grade. When my first class, we're in first grade in Victory Elementary School. They have a group of kids, and when somebody comes up and call you Chink, that was the first of how I recognized that, I'm someone different. I know in the Asian culture where, it's not a big deal. Basically at that time, obviously, the word chink didn't mean much. So I didn't make nothing of it. And obviously, as a 7-year-old, you were taught that sticks and stones may break your bones, but words will never hurt you. Mm-hmm. So you just walk away. But I think, moving to present right now, the word chink has a different connotation, and it has a whole meaning in itself. And And apart from living in a very, disadvantaged community in Stockton area, where we have diverse minorities living there, having, being a part of public assistance and healthcare, part of all these races.
Oh, can you hear me, Anoy? I may have lost you. Okay, while we're waiting on Anoy, Anoy, we can't hear you. Can you hear us?
I think he says connected. So he may have lost signal there, but he should be coming back.
Okay. All right. So that is Anoy. As mentioned, he is a refugee here. He came in the 1980s. So Anoy, you can jump right in whenever you gain sound. But if not, David, I may go to you, and to get you to answer that same question is, when did you first become aware of your race?
Yeah, building on what Anoy said, I think it's quite interesting, because I first became aware of race. I think it's quite significant, because we should remember Anoy was very vivid in telling us where he was, down to the city and the school where he first became aware of his race. For me, I was in a place called Nakuru, Kenya. It was a church function at an area called Free Area, and we were at church. And it's the first time that I really became aware that there were different races. And that's because a family friend was visiting. For me, it was Dad introduced her as a family friend, and then when we meet her, she was Caucasian from Reno, Nevada, Sandy Taylor. So this is the first time experience that I had with personable with someone of a different race. Beyond that, I had seen television shows with different races, but it really never really struck a chord that, okay, because in these movies people were all mixed. Then was the first interaction, and then I realized, oh, okay, yeah, we're different. But I never put us in platforms or different pendulums. I was fascinated because someone had a completely different skin color and different hair. But so it didn't really stick as something that is completely unique until I had the first negative interaction with race, and that came when I moved to the U.S. Up to this point, of course, the vast majority of people who I interacted with in Kenya were like me, with the exception of a few tourist visitors. But when I came to the US, started school and everything else, is when I, this increasingly became aware. And I remember we were swimming, a group of kids, about 10 of us from the neighborhood, and we were at an Episcopalian swimming pool at Episcopal Theological Seminary in Austin. And there was this girl who was my sister's friend. And of course, we got into an argument, like kids get into an argument into a swimming pool for whatever reason. And then in her upset, she hurled the N-word at me. And you could see the bitterness and the anger when she was saying it. And I was like, oh my gosh, I have no idea what that word means, but it sounds really insulting. So, and I went home and looked it up. And that's when I started, becoming quite increasingly aware.
Okay.
Yeah. And I think Anoy is back on, but on mute.
Okay. Thank you, David. And we are losing you as well. I'm not sure what is happening, if you can hear me. And Noy, you want to jump in and very briefly, 30 seconds, kind of give a summary to remind our viewers what you were talking about before we lost you. Anoy? Okay. Tony, are you there? Can you hear me?
Yeah, I'm good. Can you hear me?
Yes, I can. Can you, in about 60 seconds, let us know, when were you first aware of race?
Yeah, so as we were kind of talking earlier, for me, it was kind of a subconscious thing. I think, whenever we hear people say, well, I don't see color, I didn't necessarily grow up in a house where we were taught there's different types of people. We knew the song you sang in church, red or yellow, black and white. We knew that song, but I think most people on a subconscious level know that people are uniquely different from them, right? And so again, my experience is very is different in some ways because my mother's Hispanic. She came from a family of 10 kids. Everyone lives down in the valley, South Texas. A few have moved other places, but it was always interesting whenever we'd go down and visit my Hispanic side of the family as kids. We're like the little white guys running around who don't speak Spanish, and I was like, so these people are related to me. Like, this is my family, my primos, right? My cousins, and these are my aunts and uncles and my tios and tias. I was like, but I don't understand what the heck they're saying whenever they don't speak in English. And so you kind of like, man, okay, I know this is my family, and then when you're growing up and you're in school and you get a little bit older, you start to see, okay, it seems like I can't say all, but a lot of the kids who have black and brown skin, they get put in the regular classes or the remedial classes. And it looks like all the people with white skin, again, not all, but a lot, are in the pre-AP and the GT. Like, I can count on one hand the number of black kids we had in our advanced classes in high school, and he was a teacher's kid, you know what I mean? And so from a very young age, start to put two and two together, even if no one comes out directly and tells you that, as humans, we have, different experiences and things of that nature. And so even, I'll keep this brief, but I can remember from my youth, middle school, junior high, and high school, subconsciously putting Hispanic side Tony to the back burner, right? Does that make sense? Like, and I feel terrible about this, but even to this day, I remember telling my mom, oh, make sure our house doesn't look like a little Mexico, right? I remember saying stuff like that because subconsciously, while I knew my mom's Hispanic, there was a very clear understanding of distinction, right? And in the small town that I grew up in, there was advantages to be gleaned from people think you're white, okay, whatever, no problem. That's not a bad thing. But even though, as David was mentioning before our talk, even though I got along with most everybody, I had friends from a variety of different racial backgrounds. Whenever I talked to my Hispanic friends, they'd be like, yeah, you're one of us, but you're not down. And it wasn't until later in life that I understood what that really meant. You know what I'm saying? So yeah, that's real brief, but that's it's always been there, even if no one has to tell you. I think you understand.
Yeah.
I think we got Anoy back.
Okay, good deal. Yes, thank you. Yes. All right. So I thank you all, and I want to take away one thing before we go into the next question on now experiences, is that all of you have shared that somewhere you knew that you are uniquely different, and I like how you phrased that, Tony. But the initial one was positive until somebody else showed you another side. Either David called you the N-word or called you a derogatory term that lets you know that you are on a lower level status than the other individual. And at that point, the perception of now who you are gets informed as something negative, right? As not something positive, which is very interesting. And I hope for our viewers there that you are connecting with us on that. And as I ask the panelists this question, I want you to also somewhere consciously answer these for yourself, and then walk through how you handled that and how that has informed your experiences, which segues us now to the next question. And Tony, I will start with you on this one. Describe a scenario in your life where you experienced or saw racism firsthand and how you handled it, right? Whether positively or negative. Share with that briefly for us.
So obviously my experience is going to be a little bit different because a lot of times people look at me and they assume they're in fellow company, right? They say, oh, white dude, I can speak how I want to speak and he's going to agree with me, or he's going to understand and respect my point of view, or agree with me. So, I could go on for a long time about experiences, but it's this backstage discrimination that I get to see more so than the front stage. No one's trying to come to me and be like, oh, I just hate Mexicans, you know what I mean? But what's fun and what's interesting is, here's one example. When I was teaching class at Texas A&M University while I was a grad student, I was teaching a basketball class, and I used to give high fives, handshakes with every student. We all kind of had our unique thing, right? Just to maintain positivity and get to know. Well, I had this one white kid come up. This was probably about 2 months in the semester, so he kind of got a little comfortable. And I just put my hand up for regular high five, and he goes, Mexican. And I said, huh? I said, come again? And he said, you know, like Mexicans, they sneak under the border and they try to get into our country. I said, young man, my mother is Hispanic. I am a partially biracial, whatever you're going to call it, right? I took offense to that. And his face went completely red. And I'm so sorry. I'm so sorry. I didn't, you know, I was just joking, right? You know, I'm just kidding. And I was like, no, you thought you were in fellow company. You thought because I look a certain way that you could tell me what you thought. We had a landlord when I was in college who he came over to the house and he knocks on the door, a white guy, and he says, hey, just so you know, there's going to be some Mexicans coming over to do some work. Don't worry, don't be afraid. They're my workers or whatever. And I said, sir, I am Hispanic and I'm comfortable with my own people. And I just closed the door. And I saw him walking away, just kind of like shook. And I was just like, I hope you realize that was a terrible thing to say, you know, because, and that's what I think one of the things, as we'll get to later, I think people need to realize is we have a lot more cross points of contact than we think we do. You know, whether you believe in evolution or creation, we all come from a very similar place, right? We're all related down the road. So be very careful who you want to share your jokes and other things with, because you never know, just because someone looks a certain way, who they are. You just have no idea.
Yeah. Yes. Thank you. That backstage discrimination, that's very interesting, where you said it's this idea that you're safe, so you can be honest, which you should be honest, but that honesty unfortunately comes off in a way that paints you wrongly. David, let me also turn that question to you, to describe a scenario where you first experienced or saw racism firsthand and how you handled it.
Yeah. I think piggybacking on what you said, this general idea of seeing safety as skin color is just completely bonkers and absurd, right? That what dictates your safety and how you interact with people is really based on their skin color, and that has this perception of safety, as Tony was mentioning. It's like, so if you see a great deal of Mexicans coming to mow your lawn, right? Your initial reaction is like, oh my gosh, you know, if they're Mexicans, they're not the same color as I am, and so you feel insecure. From a human perspective, you know, it's just very hard to comprehend, but really bonkers that the society has constructed this. For me, piggybacking on what I had said earlier on, you know, the first time in my life where I experienced or saw racism firsthand was, of course, when I came to America and I was in school. Up to this point, I saw people as being different, but there was not this negative aspect associated with it. Because up to that point, you know, I would go to school and people would be like, oh, you're the kid from Kenya. This is really, really cool. I hear that you're running track and cross country. Oh, we need some people like you who are really, really fast, right? And I never really understood what like you part meant, but I just thought they meant athletes, right? And so, you know, I was an athlete. I was a super athlete, as you would say in American high schools. You know, the most popular kid, the fastest kid, the one who played all the sports, you know, who got all the equivalent high school Heisman trophies. Didn't think much of it. I fit in with every single kid and every single person in high school. But I remember one time when we were going on a track meet. Now, I went to a small high school in Central Texas called Troy, in a small city population, 1,305. And I remember one time we were going to a track meet. And, you know, I was doing my thing, just saying hello to everyone, being goofy as I am. So I was late on the bus. I was the last person to get on the school bus. And you didn't really care where I sat. But I remember when I was running to get on the school bus, as the school bus was about to leave, this young guy who was a fellow athlete like mine, someone who I didn't get along with, but I didn't necessarily dislike, said, oh, everyone make room, here comes the nigger, right? And, you know, I heard it now that I knew what the term was, like, it, you know, it really burnt me. Like, it felt like a stake going through my heart, because these were people who I considered my friends, right? But in a situation where they assumed I couldn't hear them, were making this really disparaging comments. And so, you know, I brushed it off, got in the bus. but really that had an effect on me. And, it still affects me today. And I think, I don't know whether you asked what I would have done differently, but I think what I should have done was call him out on it, and said, that's a disparaging, very hateful statement. I'm really insulted. And I think he should apologize, right? Because it would have made him superbly uncomfortable to know that I had heard that, right? But instead, I pretended I didn't hear it. I didn't want to be the odd N one out in a busload of white people, so I didn't bring it up.
Yeah. Okay. That's very good. That's very good. Anoy, piggybacking that question to you, describe a scenario where you experienced or saw racism firsthand and what and how you handled that.
Yeah, actually, I did. So it was really recently, about a year ago. Actually, racism wasn't on me, but for somebody who was Hispanic. So what really happened that day was I went into a cable to exchange my cable box and saw an older Hispanic woman, her age was about 50 years old, with her daughter who's about 7 or 8 years old. I'm thinking, she brought her daughter just because, she needs somebody to translate because she doesn't speak English, right? So they went up to the counter, and what happened was this representative, what he did was he scrolled them because she couldn't speak English, and asked for her to sit down and wait. So I was just, at first I was really, I knew something was up. So I saw that, and it was, inside me was boiling. What it turns out is the fact that when the representative told the woman and her daughter to sit, he didn't mention anything about, pick a number and then we'll call you, right? So what happened is they were sitting there waiting patiently. People's gone by, and my numbers got called. I went up, and during this time when I'm up there, 5 or 6 people that came after us has already been seen because they picked a number. And then the Hispanic woman and her daughter went up, and saying, "What's going on? I've been waiting patiently." And this man told her to go back and sit. And I said, enough. I said, that was enough. Because I said, what I told him was the fact that, did you even tell her to get a ticket, right? It didn't occur to me because he was so wrapped up in the idea that they don't speak English and that he could take advantage of them. I saw that happening, and I made a public statement that, you know what, why didn't you ask him, they've been waiting patiently. No, it's their time. I think it's their time. They shouldn't be waiting anymore, right? So because I brought that up, he made him realize what he was doing, right?
Yeah.
Yeah. So for me, that was the experience that I saw, and if I had anything to change, I wish I would have spoken up earlier, or much quicker than that, right? So yeah, that was the experience that I had, and it was really, and then on top of all the other experience I have as growing up in a, disadvantaged community, but, again, racism has always been a part of the fabric of my life growing up. So sometimes you recognize it, sometimes you don't. But that's the thing that I was telling you about in terms of, the need for Asian cultures to kind of stand up, right? Because they tend to internalize all these stuff and they don't speak up. But because we're in such a time that is necessary, that's the reason why it's very important to do so.
Yes. Thank you for that. I'm going to the next question, Tony. I will direct this one to you specifically because you've talked about where you realized race, but you also experienced and saw firsthand racism. Share how this instance influenced your interaction with that other individual, regardless of whether they were white or Hispanic? How did that influence that interaction between that other individual?
So, it's so funny because for whatever reason, there's like this common sense etiquette that we have in most other scenarios and most other aspects of life. Like, David, I know you just got married, man, and you're gonna learn some things as you go throughout life, right? But anybody who is in a long-term relationship knows that you never tell your significant other, "Oh, get over it. You don't need to feel that way. You shouldn't be. That's not how you should take that, right?" You would never do that, because what happens? Don't tell me how to feel. Why are you trying to act like you know how I feel? And we don't do that in most settings of life. Most of us understand, I don't want someone telling me how I should feel, how I should experience life, how I should feel about if I felt I was slighted or whatever. But when it comes to race, we seem to do that all the time. We seem to say, "Oh, get over it, whatever. Don't worry about it. You shouldn't be dealing with, you should internalize it, or you should just let it go. They didn't really mean, take a joke, this, that, and the other." But we would never do that with our spouse, with our significant other, right? So I think it's interesting. I wanted to say that just on the front end, but I wanted to, and I'm sorry if I'm switching the question, but something that I've come to explain to people is this concept that they'll say, "Oh, well, I've got Black friends, I've got Hispanic friends. They don't tell me they experienced any racism. They don't tell me they've ever had anything bad happen to them." Well, one of the things that is interesting about that is, maybe they don't feel comfortable enough. They don't know how you're going to treat them if they tell you, "Oh, well, actually, last week, 4 times I had some negative interactions." They might think you're going to be dismissive, right? They might not trust you enough to say that. I remember very distinctly one time, one of my good buddies from doctoral school, he showed up late to class one day. I was like, "Man, where you been? Like, class is 30 minutes. He's like, "Man," he talked to me after class. He said, "I was waiting at the bus stop. The bus driver came up, stopped a little short. 2 white guys started walking, got on the bus. I followed. The bus driver closed the door and drove off and stared me down as he drove off." And of course, me, I have a very big heart for justice. And I was like, "We can find out who this bus driver was. We know what time, we know what route." I said, "Let's go get it. Right? Let's report." He's like, "Bro," he's like, if I did that for every experience I had, I wouldn't have time for anything else." Right. So I just wanted to make that point evident for people who are watching this, to say, well, I don't see or hear anything, so maybe it's not a big deal. And it's not their fault that maybe they don't see it, because their lens is different. Their lived experience has never been empathetic to it, because it hasn't been part of their experience. Right. But that's why it's important that this type of conversation happens, because at the end of the day, we want to try and love our brothers and sisters and try to make the world a better place for our children one day. And so if you're not willing to listen and talk and be dismissive, you're never going to get someone to tell you the truth in any relationship. This is no different.
Yeah. That's very good. I like that. David, can you you shared about the instance where you were getting on the bus and that student called you the N-word, clear the way. Did that influence your interaction with that student, or just in general with all the students on the bus?
It influenced my interaction with society, actually, is what I would say, because that was a really glaring moment for me, a defining moment. And I wish you had people like Tony or like Enoy at that particular time who would have intervened, because I could have gone through my teenage and early adult years without this chip on my shoulder, where you felt like, you were different. And you are different, not in a positive way. And so a vast majority of my life, in high school and in elsewhere, was spent trying to show this person that I wasn't the N-word, right? That I was like them. And like them, I meant that, I was just a normal human being. For me, I saw myself as a normal human being. He saw me as a Black, and more specifically, the N-word. And so this differentiation, I was like, and I couldn't really understand why that was there at a young age. And so I spent a great deal of effort trying to convince myself and others that I wasn't that. All right, and I didn't do it in terms of calling it out. What I did was trying my own way to make people feel comfortable around me. So when I would go into a petrol station, or a gas station, as you call it in the US, to fill up and I had to go inside. One, I avoided going inside as much as I could because I always felt that when I went inside a convenience store, right, it made the clerk uncomfortable. And so what do I do if I'm going to go inside the convenience store? I try to make the clerk as comfortable as possible. And that meant acting out in very irrational and non-normal ways. And so I would, be very submersive, be very, subjective to what it is that they were saying. And if they felt, I was too close to the counter, I would stand, further back. I was essentially servile, right? And the whole idea was to try and make myself feel very small so that this person doesn't see me as a threat. And I went through many years of that. And it's a very painful and dehumanizing experience where, you have to, make yourself feel so out of character, because at one particular point you're like, okay, why in the world does this guy see me as threatening? I'm polished, I'm dressed to the T, my shirt is tucked in, it just boils down to my skin color, right? Or the first thing you go in, it's like, oh, you're not from around here. I'm like, no, actually, I've lived here for the past 8 years. It's like I am from around here, but at the same time, I'm conscious that if I'm living my own street, I have to carry a driver's license, passport, and all forms of ID, because who knows who will stop me. So those particular type of things, it really changes your behavior. Yes. Now in adulthood, especially with the Black Lives Matter movement and things that are going on, for other young people or people who are going through this who may not be young and whatever walks of life, it really points them out to, like, actually, it's wrong what the clerk was doing. You don't have to act like that. You should act the way you are, and not worry whether the guy finds you threatening, because it's a stereotype.
Yeah. Yes. Yeah. That's very good, and I love that. And let me shout out to my viewers. I see some viewers right there. Thank you for joining in, and let us know. Put in the chat box. I'm able to see the chat box. What are your thoughts on this conversation? Should we continue conversations such as this, right? And are you learning? And hopefully, as you listen to these experiences are experiences that represent 3 individuals, but they're experiences that represent other people, right? They're telling stories of other men and women that they have crossed paths with, just as you have. So thank you for tuning in. Shout out to Paul, Fiona, Giovanni, Socorro, Priscilla, Nash, Base. Hello. Good to have you. So let us know how conversations that you have had or experiences with other people have truly shaped how you interact with them. And one thing is resounding here, and I hope we can all attest to that, is that it was not until somebody demeaned who you are and what you look like that you started in some way seeing that as negative. So in our interactions every day, we learned. Somebody gave us a narrative that being Black, being Asian, being Hispanic is not preferred. It wasn't our parents, it wasn't those close to us, it was society outside. Society outside is the people you meet on the walkways and the byways. It's the people you interact with at the gym. Ask yourself, have you, maybe in how you responded to somebody, in how you called somebody a certain descriptor that is negative to them, you have shaped their perception of who they are, right? I am because we are. That is an African proverb based on the stories and the things and the words spoken for me, to me, at me. They define and I wear that cloak. So can we as society make sure that when I talk about Tony, when I talk to Tony, I give him positivity, I affirm him as an individual that is authentic and unique, so that the cloak that he wears to describe himself is informed by things that affirm him. So I want to, as we pivot now to impact of these interactions, want us to really call attention to the fact we have the power to shape how people perceive themselves. And David said a very good thing. He said that he felt that he had to shrink himself to make himself smaller so that he was not perceived as a threat. So that perception is not only his, but is yours. Have you caused somebody to diminish themselves because they think you see them as a threat? We have the power to teach people to love. We have the power to teach people to hate. Which one will you choose in your conversations and in your interactions with other people? We can change the world. We can change the world. So let me segue real quick to impact. Anoy, let me direct this question to you. Describe a scenario where your race impacted you at the institutional or the organizational level.
Yeah, definitely. So the experience I have, prior to working with WaterPay, I've also worked at other banking institutions, right, and in a very international arena. One of the things that happened to me in that former job was the fact that I have a superior who, not to be political or anything like that, is very, very conservative and a very strong supporter of the administration. So the idea that when you ask something that is different from what his views are, the conversation becomes very uncomfortable.
Mm-hmm.
And it felt like I couldn't approach my boss to have a decent conversation of understanding and where we're at. And the fear of approaching him then leads to the fear of, diminish of production, right? Because the communication just kind of collapsed because of the fear of approaching someone who has a different idea and different viewpoints from you. So the impact for me was not only on a personal level, but on a very productive level as well. So at the end of the day, a lot of people say, hey, let's agree to disagree. But at sometimes, it's gone to the extreme that sometimes it's more healthier to part ways than to stay and be lower, like how David had to lower himself. But the impact that it caused on me is it shrunk my morality. It shrunk a lot of what I hold true and valuable, and that has what organizationally has been the impact for these types of a relationship.
Okay. David, I will ask you that question as well. How has your race impacted you at the institutional organizational level?
So, we work for institutions where people of color are minorities. And there's always this perception from the people who are on the receiving end of this, whether when I was in academia or even where I'm presently, is that you got to that position because, someone made it, or you're the quota, or you're the diversity candidate, right? And if you had been, if it wasn't for that quota or the diversity candidate and you were being evaluated on your merit, you would not be there. And that is, dehumanizing to some extent because it undervalues your capabilities. At the same sense, there's also this reality that I realize as a Black person that there is a community that has been completely disenfranchised. And as a result, there are not many of them where I am because of the societal implications that have been placed upon them, whether it's the schools where they're going to, housing, and all this other stuff that inhibit them from getting there. But even when you do get there, there is this expectation that like, oh, you're not supposed to be here. And organizations far and wide are dealing with that. For me, I remember distinctly in my academic days when I was a university professor. And one time I went to give an exam, and you know how the universities assign the exam rooms randomly. So it's not an exam that you sometimes typically meet. You're put in a different exam room. And the exam room that I was put into to give my students exams, I needed to enter a password to access the building. It was an alarm password. I had the key, but I needed the password, right? It was this very complicated algorithm, it felt like. And, you know, you're tense, you're trying to get the students the exam. So, you know, I messed up a few pin keypads, and you couldn't really tell whether you had disarmed it or it was still armed, but apparently it was a silent alarm and it kept going, right? So I go in and I start giving the exam. You know, we're about 15 minutes into the exam and I hear this loud banging on the door, the glass door, and you know, walk out. It's the police, and then they're like, "What are you doing here?" I was like, "Well, I'm giving an exam." They're like, "Is it? What do you mean you're giving an exam?" I was like, "These are my students. I'm the professor. I'm giving them an exam. It's finals week." And it took a lot of convincing to convince this peace officer that I was there meritoriously. I was the professor of record. Right, and he goes, yeah, but I am sure. Are you sure? Are you not the TA? Are you the teaching assistant? You know, I need the person who gave you access to the building. And I'm like, I am the person who gave me access to this building. Long story short, I told the guy, listen, you need to do what you're gonna do because I need to go back in here and supervise this exam. So he took my name, my number, every single thing, every identifying information that I had. And, you know, I think he never contacted me after that because, of course, when he went and pulled up into the system, he saw that I was a professor in that university, and, you know, that solved that. But, you know, it's just that interaction. And I wonder if, you know, one of my, you know, white students had gone to answer the door rather than me. And I for sure know that that interaction would have been different. In the organization that I work in, you know, currently with the Black Lives Matter movement, we're also undergoing an internal focus and seeing that, you know, racism does have a prevailing factor in how people rise within an organization. And a lot of that comes in, you know, sometimes subconsciously. You say that, oh, no, we have opened up the doors. We have 5 Hispanics, 4 Black people, and 3 Asians. We're doing very well, right? And then you find, you know, it's not at all representative of the population, but people feel as if they've done this checkmark and that's all they need to do to end racism. And you know, we still have a long way to go from an institutional perspective. And I think, I know actually, not I think, the institutional perspective is just a reflection of the wider societal perspective. And so it's for us to change the institutions, to change our law officers, to change our police officers, we have to ask these questions at the societal level, change them at the societal level. That way this unconscious bias or subconscious or conscious bias do not seep through to how people make decisions in the boardroom.
Yes.
I have to piggyback. I have to.
Yes.
Okay.
I now actually wanted you to, because you intersect this, not only experiencing it, but also because this is your research area, right? So you can, and I want you to speak to it not only from a point of experience, but a point of research.
Sure. So, well, hopefully I don't ramble too much, but, you know, David talked about this concept of like a minority hire, a quota hire, or the quote unquote diversity hire. And because I hear people talk and they'll say, yeah, I applied for such and such job, but I didn't get it. They went with a diversity hire, right? And so what, if you ever hear that, what I would encourage you to do is to say, let's time out for a second. So basically in your statement that you say they only hired David because he's, you know, a minority, you are actually saying you are better than him because that's the only reason he got it. You're not even questioning whether he's qualified. You're not questioning whether he has the credentials. Maybe David's been doing it for 10 years and you just got fresh out of college. So within the statement, they went with a diversity hire. You are making a racial statement. You are saying, I inherently am better than David because why else would he have gotten the job over me, right? And so that's the fascinating thing to me is that, you know, people say, oh, you know, y'all are just looking for trouble. You're looking for problems. I'm like, no, it's actually harder to ignore than it is to see. Does that make sense? Mm-hmm. I remember when I was in grad school and I went to one of my good mentors, Black female professor, and I was like, Doc, I said, this is painful. I said, can you ever turn it off? Like, can you ever turn off the lens or the viewfinders? And she just looked at me, she says, sweetie, no. Like, once you've seen it, you can't unsee it. And it's, you know, but at the same time, it's encouraging because you feel like you can make a difference. Because as we spoke earlier, talking about impact, You know, I'll give a few examples as a professor. You know, we work in at Texas A&M University Commerce. We do have a large minority population, especially within our health and human performance program. We have a very large Black student body, and we have, you know, Hispanic. We're trying to be a Hispanic serving institution, everything. I use it as a humanizing tactic. Like whenever people see me, you know, oh, he's another white professor, I'm like, hey, I'm a first generation college student. I didn't come with money, right?
Yeah.
My mom,
Yeah.
it's almost like, oh, it's almost like you become part of, I hate to say there's a bond or an unspoken bond, but it's almost as if there's a relational aspect, as if someone else gets it. Does that make sense what I'm saying?
Yes. Yeah.
So you can use that as an empowerment tool and as a de-escalating or a relationship building tool. And then as far as, you know, just impact goes, again, my main point is to challenge the way we think. If you say some of these things, what are you really saying? And you might not mean anything by it. Someone might say, oh, well, they went with a diversity hire, but you don't have any ill will. You're just jaded. You didn't get the job. Maybe you were a good candidate, but what are you really saying when you say that? Really, really question and challenge where that motive is coming from.
Yes. Yes. I like that. And that reminds me, and I like what you said, Tony, about using these spaces. And there's research when you look at social justice and you're focusing on different things, there's this idea of a counter space. And this counter space is where individuals that have been marginalized and pushed to the margins, as a way to be resilient, is they come together to create a counter space to help unwrite the narrative, to help undo what has been spoken and to inform this. So if you're watching today and you represent somebody that has been marginalized or pushed to those margins like we talked about last week, you also do have the power and the capacity to create these counter spaces that counteract and undo what has been said, and use your platform to challenge the bias and the prejudice and the stereotypes about who you are and who your people are as a whole. So we do have the power to do that. And Michelle Obama, there's a quote that she says, and I'll paraphrase it. It says that no matter what the type of public figure you are, we all are public figures. We all have a platform we can talk to. It is our responsibility to use that platform positively. So as an instructor in an organization where the majority of my students are first generation college students or are minority students, I can use that space to affirm them. And when I affirm them, I'm facilitating this counter space that will help lessen the brunt of the negativity and the impacts, the negative outcomes of racism. And I love that this is a beautiful conversation, and we're getting ready to now talk about solutions, right? And we've all hit about those in various ways. Speaking up earlier, I should have said this a little bit differently, or I should have done this. So I will ask this question to all of you, and Anoy, I will ask you to answer it first. What is one thing we can all individually do today to fight racism at the local level?
That's a great question. You know what? Very, very simple. Assemble your friends, your families, speak up, and then, just vote. I think that's the only way that things are going to change, just because, there is macro level, but I think the policies is done way up. So yeah, assemble and make your voices heard.
I like that. Tony?
Yeah, I like to speak in, I don't want to say symbolism, but I like stories. I like imagery. I think it helps to paint a picture. One of the ways I like to describe this issue is, let's say you've got you and your college roommates, right? Your first college roommate, your second college roommate, they all dump their dirty dishes in the sink. No one wants to clean up after themselves, right? Well, you might be a good person who cleans your dishes regularly. But if you just say those dishes aren't my problem, I didn't make that mess, eventually the dishes are going to pile up and you're going to have no more clean silverware, no more clean plates to use. So I think it's interesting where we're at in society right now, because if we all act as if it's not my problem, my family wasn't slaveholders, this, that, and the other, whatever the case may be, so therefore I don't have to deal with it. Well, the damage is there and it's starting to spill over whether you like it or not. So we have to clean the dirty dishes. We have to fix the foundation, even if we didn't crack it. Does that make, I mean, I hope that comes across
Yes.
as clear.
Yes.
You can ignore, someone could punch you in the eye and say, oh, I don't see the black eye I've got on my face, I'm not bruised. Well, you might lose your eyesight if you don't get it taken care of. You know what I mean?
Yes.
So it's just, at the end of the day, just love people. I feel like it takes way more energy and effort to be ugly to someone than it does to be kind to someone. Go out every day and say hi. You have no idea. If I pass David on the sidewalk and he just had a bad experience with someone else, me just saying, hi, how's it going, and being cordial and friendly, it might make it, if someone had done that on your bus, David, versus everyone got quiet whenever that student said that, you might not have had to have, the same experience later in life. You said, if someone would have just stuck up for me, if someone would have just said, hey, why would you say something like that? It could have been a completely different experience for you, right?
Mm-hmm. Yes.
It doesn't seem hard to be a good person, but it apparently.
Yeah. David, what about you?
No, I completely agree with what Anoy and Tony said. Yeah, you have to stand up. I think for me, the what I would say is you have to end the silence. And a lot of these things self-perpetuate in society because good people do nothing. And I would even go a step further and say that good person ceases to be good when they stay silent. Just because you're not undergoing through something doesn't mean you have to let it by. It's a societal problem, which makes it your problem. And the other thing to that is, if there's one familiar structure with racism, it comes from ignorance and a lack of interaction with different people. And the more we can diversify aspects of society, institutionally or otherwise, the more we have, our men and women in blue who are reflective of the society that they are served to protect, the less we will have these instances. It's this us versus them mentality that we draw on the line simply based on skin tone. And even the young man who said those words to me was doing it from a place of ignorance, because if he had interacted with me at the same level that he interacts with his white friends, he would realize that there's actually no defining factor that's different from us. And if we can get society to have much more interaction, we can reduce a great deal on these instances. The first part is saying, standing up and saying no, right? And allowing that young lady that Enoy was talking about to have their space, right? And that interaction with that service clerk will be like, oh, okay, this is a bona fide human being and I should treat him as such, right? And you question those things. And I think that can bring about a change in society.
I like that. And let me read a few quotes from our viewers. We're doing great on time, guys. And thank you, panelists, for doing that. Giovanni Roselli says, if I were to remain silent, I'd be guilty of complicity. Albert Einstein said that, and completely agree. Martin Luther King also says, he who accepts evil without protesting against it is really cooperating with it. In the end, we will remember not the words of our enemies, but the silence of our friends. And Bay says, I like the cleaning the dish analogy. Sometimes we have to show people how it's done, even though it might be mentally and emotionally tough, especially when the task is their physical responsibility. Absolutely. So somebody has to do the dishes at some point. It becomes this, they'll do it, somebody will do it, and nobody ever does it. And what ends up happening is we have this dirty, stinky mess that becomes stagnant water, that now all those mosquitoes that we facilitated are now biting and attacking all of us. So I like the focus on individual responsibility that all of you panelists have attributed to. And so That brings us to our closing question, guys. What is the main message you would like the audience to take away from today's session? If they were to listen to the next 60 seconds that you speak, what is the main message you will want them to take away? And we will start with you, Tony.
Oh, no pressure. Okay. No, you know, talking about this type of stuff doesn't have to be awkward. It doesn't have to be hard. It doesn't have to be so charged. I think as humans, if we would just reach across, you know, to use imagery, the aisle, whether it's politics or religion or your view on whatever, if we would just reach across to our neighbor and say, hey, who are you? We would find we have more in common than we are different. There's a really fascinating YouTube channel called Jubilee, and they do these video series. It's called Middle Ground. And so they'll take like an atheist and a Christian. They'll take a Black Lives Matter and a law enforcement. They'll take a Republican and a Democrat, and they will have them talk with each other face to face and try and find middle ground. I think it's a great concept. Their quote on their channel is, hold on. We believe in the power of empathy for human good. I think if that was our motto, the power of empathy, walking in someone's shoes, just having conversation with someone, I think we could do so much good, and we'd realize we're not that different. You know, if you've got kids, we all love our kids. We want them to succeed and do well. If you're struggling through grad school, you're all struggling through grad school. You know what I mean? There's so much we have in common that if we would just get out of our bubble, it's these bubbles that we create, this us versus them and everything in life that we don't even try to reach across and meet someone who's unique or has a different experience than us. And then the last thing I would say is that for those of us who believe in faith or have some form of religious belief, one of my favorite hip hop artists, he said, we have taken the teachings of the Bible from love God, love people to love God and love only those people who look like me, love only those people who believe like me, love only those people who vote the way I vote, right? When that's not the message. The message is love people. That's the message.
Yes. Yes.
It doesn't have to be hard.
Yes, absolutely. Thank you for that. Anoy, what is one takeaway you would want somebody to take away from today's session?
Absolutely. On with Tony. Look, guys, it is a solvable solution, right? Peel back the ignorance, peel back the dignity, and continue the conversation. It's not something that's not doable. And once you do that, I mean, magic can happen. Magic can happen. So just be open. That's what I wanted to leave with on this message, is just please be open to the possibility that this is a solvable problem or issue.
Yes. David?
For me, it would be just to stand up, end the silence. I would end with the scripture that influences my life, and that's the book of Isaiah, chapter 1, verse 17, where it says, learn to do good, seek justice, correct oppression, bring justice to the fatherless, and plead the widow's cause. And I think that really strikes at the heart of what, us trying to solve injustice is doing, is that we have to learn to do good, and we have to stand up for those who cannot stand up by themselves. And that means correcting situations when and if they arise. It's one commonality that we've taken from what I have said, and Noy and Tony, is that if someone had stood up for us when we were facing this, our first interaction with racial problems, it would have saved us a lot of heartache and pain.
Yes, yes. Wow. You talk about concise and to the point. I love that. And because of that, we have a whole 12 minutes. We may have to sing a song or something. But let me wrap up here. And my goodness, I thought I knew, I thought I understood, but just this interaction, has been now just a whole hour. It's amazing what a conversation, regardless of how short or brief, can truly open up the world. And what Anoy says, be open and let the magic happen. And I hope for all of us viewing, and even us, the panelists and the moderator, that we are seeing the power of open and intentional conversations. If we allow them, conversations become the bridge and the vehicles that we use to bond us together and further unite us in taking individual action that has institutional impact. The resonating theme throughout tonight was, if one person had stood up, if one person had spoken earlier, if one person had XYZ, what if today you are that one person for somebody? What if today you were that one person for that minority student at the local school, and you say, I'm not going to stand here and allow somebody to bully this young man because of the color of his skin or even his religious identity? Or maybe you are at a grocery store or at an antique store, like I shared on my Facebook profile, and you see somebody being mistreated or being followed because simply of who they are. What if you were that one person that stood up? And standing up does not have to be so volatile. It can simply be, hey, what you're doing is not right. Because as somebody in the comments said, sometimes you have to teach people how to do dishes. So we can also teach people to be kind. We can teach people to stand up by doing it ourselves. So wherever you're listening from, whoever you are, decide today that you will be that one person. Margaret Mead says this: never doubt that a small group of thoughtful, committed citizens can change the world. Indeed, it is the only thing that ever has. A committed group of people. In this panel, we have 4 committed individuals. On the YouTube page, we have tens of committed individuals and people that will watch and share this. Let us decide to stand up today. I challenge all of us to replicate similar conversations in everyday settings where we don't shy away from having conversations, even if they are uncomfortable. Remember, every conversation starts with a hello, it's me. I was wondering, ta-ta, 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 ta-ta. That first date you went on, that first friend you made, it started with a hello. And today, you can be a friend to the disadvantaged. You can be a friend to those whose society has set on by saying, hello, it's me. And today I'm going to choose to stand up for you. Wow. Give yourselves a hand, panelists. Just give yourselves a hand because y'all have been amazing. I can just go on and on here. Wow. I'm speechless. I am speechless. And I hope I can speak for everybody that has tuned in and will tune in, that this has sparked the audacity to hope that committed individuals can stand up and make a difference. We can join those that are speaking out against injustices, and we can do it safely, respectfully, in a way where we bridge the divide, where we break the bubble, as Tony said, where we build bridges and peel back the ignorance, peel back those layers and allow ourselves to connect. Yes. And people on the chat, let me read out some comments here, panelists. Learn to do good, love people, be open, stand up. I'll stand up. And Eve said, I too will stand up. So we have people already standing up. Let us continue standing up. And one way you can stand up today, and I challenge you to stand up today, share this conversation, replicate this conversation, maybe in your small book club, with the people you work out and sweat with, running marathons with, the people that you associate with in your place of worship. Because it is in the everyday setting where these injustices come up. It is in the grocery stores, the places we live, we eat, we work, we pray, we grow. It's here that those injustices become noticeable. And it is here that we can make a difference. So I want to thank you, our panelists. Thank you, Tony. Thank you, David. Thank you, Anoy. And thank you, the background team. You know who you are, that is over there typing up notes, that is moderating, streaming this. Thank you for making it happen. And to our panelists, Anoy, David, and Tony, wish you all the best in the world as you continue what you are doing to make the world a better place. And today we thank you for standing up. Thank you for speaking up. Thank you for showing up and teaching us how we too can stand up. And to you, our listeners, from wherever you are tuning in from, thank you for making this happen. The conversation that we had was informed by the feedback that you gave on that Inform the Conversation Google form. Thank you for informing that and for being here and tuning in from the first hello to the last session. And here at Talks with E, our conversations do not end with a goodbye. Our conversations end with a let's talk again, because we can never have too many conversations. And next week, we will have another panel made up of fabulous women. Who run the world? Girls. Who run the world? Girls. Who run the girls? Not really. We all run the world, but allow me, right? So next week, we will be joined by some fabulous women giving us their perspective, because everybody is needed at the table. Society is not black, white, blue, green. Society is a human race as a whole. So all of us are needed at this table. So I hope you will tune in here, subscribe, like, give one last comment. Remember, as we finish this conversation, shoot your shot. Shoot your shot in terms of invite somebody and say hello to have a conversation. Until next time, let's talk soon. God bless you, and see you for